Well, if you've been at any of the other meetings, there's like the application cycle is like pretty much a year long. And there's various points in which like things are more traditional in which you would do them. So we're kind of going to be zooming into this like May, June, July time frame is where kind of the primary application is most relevant. So as you can see with the little red like triangle, that's the beginning of May is usually, or star, diamond, I don't know what you call it. The beginning of May is usually when the application itself opens. So this just means that you can go into the actual like website and start inputting, like first of all, start looking at what's in the application, but then also start inputting all of the material that you're going to do. As you'll see once we kind of get into it a little bit more, it's pretty decent in terms of what like information goes in it, how detailed you need to be. And so yeah, as soon as it opens, good idea to just take a glance at it, kind of see what you're going to be having to input. And then usually it's like the end of May or like the very first few days of June is when you can start to submit the primary application. And so for that 1 month period, basically, the application is open, but nothing is able to be submitted yet until, late May, early June. Um, and I'm sure we'll get into it later, but there is some strategy or like technique in terms of like when to apply and making sure that you're optimizing your chances. And so specifically, these are the timeline. This is the timeline for next application cycle. So like if you were starting med school in fall of 2026, so like we said earlier, AMCAS is going to open May 1st, and then the submissions will open May 28th. And then the initial transmission of applications to to medical schools is not until June 27th. And so what this means is there is a period in which you can, like, if you submitted your AMCAS application on May 28th, like the very first day it opened, you press submit. The medical schools would not even receive that application the earliest until June 27th. So from May 28th to June 27th, what's happening is a double AMC is basically going through and like validating or like so the official term, but they're basically going through and they're like looking at your application, making sure everything is included. They go through and they look at the grades specifically and like the classes you took and make sure that they are um properly categorized as like a science class, a non-science class. They calculate your GPA. So there's some stuff that goes on before the med school will even receive your application. And so we'll kind of get into it a little later, but something to keep in mind. For CUS, for like Colorado University, or University of Colorado, the med school here, the earliest filing date for primary app again is in May. And then something that you'll get, which is not really the um, priority or like focus of this presentation is just the supplemental application. And so once you send a primary application, most, if not all, medical schools will send you back like a second round of questions that are usually more specific to that medical school. Generally tend to be the same types of questions, but something that you'll have to also send back. So that timeline, when you'll start receiving those earliest is in July. October 15th is when, the primary application closes. September is when you start is when the school starts to send out interviews. And so you can see just like simple kind of dates. You can submit the primary application as late as October 15th, but interviews can start going out as early as September. And so it is definitely beneficial to have your primary application in as soon as possible because then it kind of increases your chances of being offered an interview spot earlier in the cycle. And so something to just keep in mind, you know, not sacrificing the quality, but earlier is better in terms of submitting your application. And so What kind of is on the primary application? Kind of big overview. So first off is going to be the background information. So this is just like general demographics, name, date, address, you know, what are your highest level of education for your parents, things like that. And pretty simple, straightforward. The next section is the coursework and official transcripts. So for every single class that you took, whether it was in high school and you did dual enrollment, or it was like a class that got you college credit, or you went and you did a summer abroad in London for physics for one summer, like anything that you receive credit for needs to be inputted. And then you'll also need to request official transcripts. And so this is something to kind of get ahead of with your school, just because that can also take some time. And so just knowing that you'll have to request official transcripts from anywhere that you went and got the grades for those classes. The MCAT score also included. It's not very complicated. You just like link your or you like put your score in letters of evaluation. So this again also for the primary application, the way it works is like anyone who's writing you a letter, you'll give them a link. That link allows them to upload the letter, and then it gets like presented on your primary application. And then once the letter has been received and attached to your primary application, you can then choose when you're submitting your primary app which letter will go to which school. For some people, they'll get 3 or 4 letters and they'll just send all four to every single school. Some people get 8 letters and they're more choosy about like which letters or letter writers are getting sent to which schools. It's all kind of just a matter of like how many letters you get and what's best for you. Personal statement, obviously, an important part of the primary application. It's really the way that the admissions committee gets to learn a little bit more about you in a way that is not evident through like your activities or just like other aspects of your application. Work and activities, which is just including, any activities that you did that you feel you want to include. Um, they can range from like volunteer to jobs to hobbies, and you get to like denote what group it falls in, how many hours, when you did it, things like that. And then obviously part of the application is selecting which schools you're going to send your application to. So next, getting into the cost of it all, the primary application and just applying to med school in general can be quite expensive. And so as you can see, it's $175 to apply to just like one medical school, but generally people are applying to several. And so for every school that you add to your primary application, you'll be charged another $46. And so you can imagine if you are applying to 20 medical schools, which is, a reasonable number, that number can add up pretty quickly. And that doesn't include the cost of secondary applications, which I mentioned earlier, which also can stack up pretty quickly. And so, yeah, the cost of applying to medical school can be quite the financial burden. Luckily, a lot of places after COVID have kind of stuck with interviews being conducted virtually, and so that takes a lot of cost away from traveling, airfare, hotels. So that is one benefit, but it is important that you check the school specifically because while this is, I think, more common, there are still schools that do now have like in-person interviews, and so just something to keep in mind. And then with kind of the cost being so high, there are the assistance programs that can be used to kind of help alleviate some of this financial burden. And so the AAMC's fee assistance program is really helpful. Um, it is something that if you get approved, it covers the cost of the primary application, and then often it'll also cover the cost of the MCAT registration. You will get usually like MCAT prep materials for free. You'll get like access to the MSAR, which is like a medical school search engine. You'll get that for free. And then secondary application fees, generally, if you get the fee assistance program, most schools will also waive that secondary application fee, but it's not necessarily a guarantee because the primary application fee is through the AAMC. And so when they waive it, they are kind of waiving their own program. But secondary application fees, those are directed to the schools themselves. And so, like for me personally, I applied and I got this fee assistance program, but there were still, I think, two schools that I actually had to still send like a fee in for my secondary application. But a majority of schools do waive that if you qualify. And then it opens quite early. So next month it'll open for like the next cycle. My advice is to yeah, to do this as soon as possible, just because it's not something that gets um like added retroactively. So for me, I had already registered for the MCAT before I had applied and got approved for this. So I paid for the MCAT when realistically I could have had that waived. And so yeah, just and also you'll need to get like your parents' tax thing, like returns, and there's some logistic stuff that just can take some time. So yeah, better to just get it started early. And then we'll have a like a financial kind of not financial aid, but just like a finances presentation on applying to medical school and whatnot. So, what do each of these sections include? We'll dive a little bit deeper into that. So, kind of mentioned it earlier, but the background info is just identifying information. So, like your demographic info, the high school you apply to, and then everywhere that you would have gone for post-secondary school, which I mentioned earlier, and then some biographic information like contact info, race, ethnicity, languages, family information. I believe in the background info, and Spencer or Brendan can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in this section of the application, there's also like a hardship paragraph that you can include where it's a small little paragraph, but basically it's like a space that the application will give you to explain in any way like you may have been disadvantaged or any specific like you know, hurdles you may have had to encounter or like overcome. Um, and I think like I filled this out, and I think specifically I kind of commented on like just like my socioeconomic status. So something to also another place to kind of give some more context for your application as a whole.
Yes, there's a section in there called other, let me get the actual word, other impactful experiences that go in the biographic information. And then also within there, within the ethnicity and race, they tend to change it every couple years, but depending on your ethnicity and your race, it will be flagged as underrepresented in medicine. If you're wondering if you qualify as that or if what you identify as will be qualified, they will publish those each year in their applicant guide. So the new one is not out yet.
Yeah. So move on to coursework. So like we mentioned, you're going to have to put in all your coursework. The part of the application is that they will calculate basically, you'll get an overall GPA and you'll get a science GPA, and then you'll get like a non-science GPA. Um, and so the science GPA is comprised of classes that would fall under the kind of big umbrella categories of biology, chemistry, physics, or math. Um, and then anything else not deemed to like be in that, it goes into the other GPA calculation. The AAMC does provide kind of like it's like a PDF with like various courses that would fall under this. So like for biology, I think you can technically take like I think I took like forgot what it was. It was like I think it was like a physiology class that would like fall under there. And then like math, like stats could fall under there. Like there's a PDF that goes more into it, but it's not and there's some ways to get creative with it. And my general advice is to, if you think it could qualify as a science class, just put it as a science class, especially if you got a good grade in it, because the best thing that's going to happen is that the AAMC will approve it and then it goes towards your science GPA. The worst that'll happen is they will correct it once you submit your application, and then it just goes into your other GPA. So when in doubt, either reach out to like the AAMC if you want like ahead of time, or just classify it as a science course and see what happens. Um,
And Jacob,
like
I just put that list or a link in with like the course list. So if
beautiful.
people want to take it that, it's in the chat.
Thanks. Um, and then, yeah, like we said earlier, official transcripts can take a while. So just kind of get that started early, usually just like reaching out to your registrar's office at whatever school you went to. Um, Another thing is just like when you're going through these classes, make sure that you are also looking at whatever schools you're deciding to apply to. You need to have met their prereq requirements. And so either, making sure you meet them. If you don't meet them, deciding like, are you going to go back and take these classes to meet it, or is just it's not going to be a school for you? Um, and then kind of we touched on it earlier, but processing your application once you even submit it can take up to 6 to 8 weeks. And so it is mostly, beneficial for you to submit your application early, as long as you feel like you have finished to a point where you feel proud of it and you think it's a quality application. Don't rush it for the sake of rushing it. But if you feel like you've gotten into that place where you feel comfortable, it's good to submit it. So your personal statement, it's kind of it's easy and it's hard because it's easy because it is they gave you pretty free reign in terms of what you want to talk about. The prompt is just use the space provided to explain why you want to go to medical school. It's 5,300 characters, so it's not, crazy long, but it is enough to, fill a page. And then some like exceptions or just additional things is if you're doing the MD PhD program, you have to submit some more essays in terms of things related specific to that program. Um, and then, yeah, just I think goes without saying, but just, once you feel like you got to that point, make sure that there's no spell checks, no typos, like the formatting isn't weird. Um, Generally people like save it in a Word doc, work on it, edit it, and then once they're ready, finally they copy and paste it in. Um, yeah, there's not really formatting options except just like pressing enter twice so you can show that it's a paragraph. Um, and yeah, in terms of what to talk about, generally, like I said, it's pretty open to interpretation. I think a lot of people tend to try to ground it in something that can explain why they've selected medicine, what's a motivation. Um, some people can use this space to explain something that wasn't talked about or really shown in other aspects of their application. Um, and then if you didn't really get to explain it fully or you want to talk about it more, you can talk about hardships, challenges, things that have been obstacles for you. And this is also a good place to talk about, if you failed a whole year in undergrad because your mom passed away or something like really significant that can explain like a hit to your academic record. This could also be a place to talk about it. Generally, if you're going to kind of take the unique hardship, challenges, obstacles approach, it's important that you, in also talking about these, explain or try to show how you've either like overcome them, how they have contributed in some way to your perspective or attitude in regards to medicine, and like how that has motivated you to enter medicine. But yeah, people get pretty creative with personal statements. There's no one right way. Some people like I've seen like when I was looking up, I saw people do like poems. I saw people would kind of do like a back and forth story. So it kind of just depends what feels best for you. Um, so um, Yeah, some advice is start in the middle. If you kind of really can't think of where to start, just think of like, oh, one thing I really want to talk about, or one thing that really stands out to you, and then build your set essay around that. You're not going to get it right the first time, so like don't be afraid to write something and then scrap it completely. That's what I did. If it feels right to you, like I feel like you kind of can feel, even if it's like a really rough draft, once you kind of get that idea of what you want to talk about, it's a lot easier to kind of, go at it with edits and really, I guess, like hone it in and be more specific. But yeah, just getting the idea down is honestly, I feel like half the battle. And then kind of typical things for personal statements. You want to show, not tell. So like, don't just be like, oh, I am excited about medicine, but like show an experience. Like talk about this volunteer experience at Children's Hospital where you did this, this, and this, and how that showed you this aspect of medicine. So like, yeah, try to show it through examples and not just like say one-liner statements. And then the double AMC always puts out like like kind of like the things to look out for in a medical student. And so um, it's helpful to kind of go and view that and see if there's any things that you can incorporate to kind of show that these experiences have prepared you for XYZ, because now you have like communication skills or you have like problem solving skills. Um, and then this can take quite a long time, both just like thinking of what you want to talk about, but also even once you get there, um, you want to take multiple passes at it. You want to see um, how it flows. You want to make sure that it's concise and telling a story. Um, I think the biggest piece of advice that I could give is just make sure that like you are fundamentally answering the question of why you want to go into medicine. And then also just general advice is to have people read it who like know you well, because I think they will be able to read it and really reflect if this is true to you, if it feels authentic. And the people who are closest to you, whether it's like friends or partners, can often be a good source. And then my only like caution is just being like careful about sending it to too many people, just because sometimes if you send it to a lot of people, everyone's going to have a different take or different opinion, and it can feel a little overwhelming to feel like you have like 10 different opinions and ultimately you need to have one personal statement. And so I think it's important to select maybe a few people that you send it to who you really trust their opinion, and then just work off that. And ultimately it's your personal statement, so at the end of the day, take the feedback, but you need to write something that is true to you and it feels like an essay that you are proud of. I kind of already talked about this, but just the why, not the how. Oh, sorry, the why and the how, not just the what. And then, like I said, don't just like list off things. You kind of want to like show it through these experience that you did. And yeah, you the person on the admissions committee, like when they're reading your personal statement, um they want to know like why does this person want to go into medicine? And so by the end of your personal statement, if you feel like you haven't answered that question, I think that's a good indication to go back and kind of see where you can um you know try to highlight that more. And yeah, this is not how to explain it? It's like not necessarily the best time to be like flowery with your language. I think that like the best kind of writing is like short and concise writing. Um, get the point across. Again, this is a character limit, so you want to have like the most bang for your buck. And if you can say the same thing in a much simpler and shorter way, I would go with that. Um, yeah, red flag would just be to talk about something that you should not technically have been doing as somebody who wasn't in medicine. So like sometimes people go on like trips abroad and they do like medical missionary work, or they go and they help someone in a different country. That is not allowed. And so, yeah, talking about how you went to, a developing country and you were helping people deliver babies or something like that could be seen as like a red flag. Um, this is just more into like what makes the personal statement good. Try to be clear, try to be concise. Um, the I want to help people is not a thought out enough answer, because if you put that in a personal statement, or if you answered that to somebody on an interview, they would say like, "Oh, well, you could help somebody by being a nurse." So like the question needs to be like, how do you want to help somebody in the context of being a doctor? And so just give some thought to that as well. Um, and then yeah, you can it's kind of twofold, but like you can use it to highlight other aspects of your application that you haven't talked about. Um, Generally, my approach is like if I'm going to talk about it in my activity section, I want to talk about something different in my personal statement just to kind of provide as much context and information. But you could also use this as kind of a step off point to or connect it to your activities that you will talk about later in your statement or your application. Um, don't be afraid to be personal. It is a personal statement. The only thing I would say to this is like emotion is a very powerful tool, but there still needs to be some aspect of like clear messaging as to how these emotions that you are talking about have informed your decision of wanting to go into medicine. It just like can't be a one-page sob story where by the end of it they're like, "Wow, this person has had a tragic life, but I had know nothing about their intentions of going into medicine." So just like trying to strike that right balance is important. And I think this goes without saying, but don't send something by ChatGPT. It's not a human. It doesn't know your story. And yeah, Brendan, do you
Yeah,
have thoughts?
I didn't really think about this too much until just recently, but I did some quick research on like med school coach. I put the link in the chat. There's a couple of admissions deans on a video, and they kind of had a discussion around how schools are using ChatGPT or AI and how applicants should be using that. And a lot of schools differ in a lot of different ways. So I would just be up to date on how to use ChatGPT as a tool rather than using it to generate something because that might not be true to you and it might kind of come off not totally authentic. So just be careful with using it. I know it's a really great tool for editing and grammar. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't send something that it completely created.
Thanks. Um, cool. All right. So in summary, be honest about your experiences. You know, don't say why you want to go in as like, I want to help people. And then as specific as you can be, it's going to help. I think sometimes people can get in the fall in the trap of like making kind of these like profound generalized statements about medicine, but I think if you can like really ground it in something specific that is like one aspect of medicine, it can be a lot more impactful than just like saying these like blanket statements about medicine. And for the first point, like your experience is unique. Like I think that applying to medical school, I think the biggest thing I learned is that like my story was not necessarily really heavy in like traditional pre-med stuff, but it was like I thought unique and it was something I really, really enjoyed. And so it was really easy to talk about it. And I think that came across in my application and my interviews. And so if you feel like your story is like not the traditional med student experience, like don't worry because I promise you, like when you're reading something that is just like the other thousand applicants you got, it isn't like refreshing to see something in front of you that's a little different. Um, and then we already kind of talked about this, but just start early, make sure you're editing it, who you're gonna ask. Some, if you're still in undergrad or like graduate school, often they'll have like writing centers where you can go and get help, like one-on-one help with writing your personal statement. Um, Medical students are also a good resource if you know anybody just because they've been there. Um, and yeah, just being upfront with people in terms of a timeline, like if you're going to send it to a professor or somebody who you know has a busier schedule, um, obviously start earlier, that's better. But then, yeah, just be like, hi, like, would love this. If you would be able to get this back within, 2 weeks, a month, whatever's reasonable. And then yeah, feel free to like make different versions. If one paragraph feels different, you want to have a different version of it. And then, yeah, don't worry. I would say don't worry about the word limit in the beginning. Put what you want down on paper and then go back. It's a lot easier to edit out than it is to kind of like bulk up a story. And so, just kind of write what feels natural. Um, Moving on to the work and activity section. And so you are going to have up to three or up to 15 activity spots to talk about. You'll have a 700 character limit for each of them, and then three of them you will note or like mark as most meaningful. And by doing that, you will get a additional 30, 1,300 characters. And so some like thought behind this is that you want to be smart with it. Like if you feel like you have way more activities than 15, combining related activities into a single entry. So like if you have done a bunch of research, sometimes people will combine their research into like one entry and just list out the different research projects that they've done. The meaningful activities are helpful because the 1,300 is a decent character limit to really kind of expand on these experiences. And I felt like, I didn't put as much time into these as my personal statement, but for the most meaningful, I did spend a decent amount more time on these than the rest of my activities. And so just something to think about. The advice I'll give for like the work and activities is keep an Excel sheet or like a journal about the activity you do, when you do them, how many hours, who's you're working for, that contact information, because I did not. And when it came time to apply to medical school, I had to go back on like 6 years worth of activities and like try to remember how many hours I did, what month I was there, who I could put down as a contact information. And so the earlier you do this, I promise it'll really pay off when you get to this part of the application. And then I mentioned earlier there are categories. So any activity that you put in, you will have the option to categorize it. And so just kind of, I think the benefit of this is just showing, like very directly showing, like I have a range of kind of experiences. And so you don't necessarily want, every single activity to be a publication or like a research thing. They want to see a well-rounded person who like has maybe a job and then they also did like community service at the hospital and then maybe they did community service that was not medical. And so yeah, that's my general thought. Brendan.
Yeah. I was just going to add, like, look at this list. It's crazy. There's a lot of things that you can add on here, and some of them may seem really trivial to you right now. But people love to hear about this stuff. Like, you can tell people about your hobbies. So if you, I don't know, crochet, and like that's something that you really, really enjoy, and that you've put a lot of time into, people want to get to know who you are as a person. So really explore this list and um, try to fill out those 15. Sometimes you can't, and that's totally fine. But like really let the people know who you are, and get creative with it.
Yeah, I remember for mine, I put for a hobby, I put like running. I was really into running before I got into medical school. And in like the blurb, I put like so I put running and then I explained how like I really enjoy running. It's a way of self-care for me. And I also used it as like a way to like look at restaurants or like places to eat when I was running. And so then it like also let me talk about being a foodie. And this probably came up like twice. When I was doing like the interview part of people like, oh, like what places in LA have you like tried or like if I've done at that point and I have not since done like any marathons, but some people who are really into running, like little things that you might think might be silly, but can be a talking point during your interview. So something that they've changed since we've applied is an anticipated experience. And so basically it is basically it is the option to list an activity that you have not yet started, but you plan to do. And so say you submit your application in like, yeah, say you submit it really early on in like June. And then you know that you are going to go and do like a 3 month like volunteer experience or you're going to do something next year like a research project, you can list that down, and you would list it as an anticipated activity, and then yeah, it's just an option for you to kind of show that something is coming up. Like we said, this application cycle it's a year long, and so a lot can happen in that time frame. And so I think this is the cool feature. So this is an example of an experience entry. And so like we said, you're gonna mark it as like what experience type it is, the name of it, general stuff like the contact info of the person who you would have reported to, and then the experience description. And so um, as you can see, it's not a huge, blurb, but good uh, time to like talk about something that was really special about the experience. And then on top right, you can see that it's um, 400 hours. So like listing how many total hours of dates. Um, for the experience section, I also like steered away from just like listing out specifically like what I did. Like, oh, I did XYZ. I was responsible for this, this, this. Like I use this chance. And it's really hard because it's only 700 characters, but I would try to like tell a story or I would try to like show something that I did or like an experience specifically from this activity and then tie it to medicine or like tie how it like impacted me instead of just like, I did XYZ for 4 months. And so, like we were talking about earlier, this is something you could do in terms of for research. So in this case, this was a meaningful experience for them, and so they use the first part to kind of talk about the skills and the impact that they had from this uh, research experience, and then for the most meaningful experience remarks, they talked a little bit more in detail about uh, the work that they did and just some experience that they had from it, and like kind of like what they learned from it. And then this one is again kind of how we were talking about combining multiple experiences. So in this case, it was shadowing. And so instead of doing, 5 different entries for shadowing, they just clumped them into one and then listed the specific details of like who and what they did. And so, yeah, a way to kind of like efficiently save activities and also still illustrate that you had, a decent amount of experiences. And then we talked about this already, but the most meaningful experiences, you get some extra characters. Um, the a cool thing, if you can get it, is to have one of the letter writers that you are submitting to schools be from the activity that you noted as most meaningful. I This is really cool if you can get it. I did not have that like chance, or it just like didn't work out. So like this is not like a rule by any means. So if it doesn't work out that way, like don't sweat it. But yeah, just one more thing to kind of show a little bit more of the impact that it had. Um, and then, yeah, what do you want to include in these responses? Um, how you grew, what makes it stand out, um, you know, anything that you feel like, oh, I want to talk about a little more, or I want to point out a little bit more that you didn't necessarily have a chance to. Yeah, Brendan?
Um, like we talked about with the personal statement earlier, you're going to write a lot of drafts, or at least I wrote a lot of drafts. And there were some stories that I threw out, but I really wanted to be told still. And so that's where I put some of my most meaningful experiences, is something that was maybe didn't quite make the cut for the personal statement, but was really, really meaningful for me still.
Cool. And then yeah, we talked about kind of keeping track of it and stuff like that. But in terms of just like what to do and like when to do it, um, do what you're passionate about. I think like the biggest stress I had about medical school, going into it was like I just felt like I did not have the typical pre-med list. Like I had never stepped into a research lab. I did not do a lick of research before coming to medical school. And then you go on Reddit or Student Doctor Network and you see like people who are on these like really cool research projects. But ultimately, I did stuff that I was really passionate about in undergrad and after undergrad. And it's really easy to write about. It's really easy to talk about, and it's really like apparent when you are on the receiving side of that, whether it's like an interviewer or you're just reading the application, like to see or kind of feel someone's passionate about it, something, it's really apparent. And so I would say lead with that. Obviously, you need to have some, at least like a couple things that are medical or medical school adjacent, but don't let it be like, oh, I need 15 activities that are strictly medicine related. You're going to do medicine once you get here for the rest of your life. So like do what you're passionate about and follow that. And I feel like kind of the rest falls into place. Um, yeah, and I think like the cool like the thing that I look back now in like with in retrospect, like I feel like my application had a story, and I think that's something I didn't give myself enough credit for. And like looking back now, I realize that like I think a lot of the success I had in my application cycle was just that like my application I felt like painted a very clear picture of who I was and what was important to me. And a lot of that aligned with medicine and the values of being a physician. And so I think that's kind of like the best case scenario. Um, yeah, you have 15 activities. Don't stress if you can't fill all of them. I think I like left like two or three blank. Um, don't write about something that you wouldn't be excited to talk about in an interview, or don't include something that you actually didn't really have active participation in. Because if you say like you were part of this club and write about it in a way that implies that you were really involved and that you might have had like a higher leadership role, and then that was not the case, and somebody talks about it during an interview, it's very apparent like when you are being lied to or someone's trying to like yeah, just add fluff to their application. And then yeah, don't just like seek something out to check a box. If it's the month before and you just feel like, oh, I want to add one more thing. Like if you did an activity for, 4 hours and now it's just a 4 hour activity on your application, like that's kind of apparent of like, oh, he just wanted one more activity. The caveat to that being like if it was like a 1 day kind of activity that was really really impactful or meaningful, obviously talk about it and bring it up. But if it's just like, oh yeah, I like read to kids for 4 hours 1 day, like that's not necessarily something that I think um would come across as very genuine. And then, as with the rest of this application, just start as early as you can. The earlier you start, like your future self will be very appreciative. And then we talked about this earlier, but yeah, write it as like a story rather than just like a list of like bullet points and responsibilities. Um, yeah, trying to describe like how it was meaningful, how it changed you. It's a lot better than just like listing out things. And then trying to just like show what like try to your blurb should in some way show that you've gained something, whether it's like knowledge and appreciation for something, respect, and just how that's like added to who you are as a person. Um, and then yeah, the little caveat about research, like you don't have to describe the whole project. Um, Obviously, activities that are going to be good for your application are things that you did for a long time. So, like, if every Saturday you volunteered at a soup kitchen for all of 4 years of undergrad, like, that's going to be something that you want to include. And it would probably be something as a meaningful experience just because you have so much time to talk about in terms of like the 4 years that you were there. Um, we talked about this earlier, but don't be afraid to include hobbies that are meaningful to you. Again, like make sure that it's an enjoyable hobby and that like you could talk about it, and that it's something that is unique or like special to you. And then um yeah, kind of like how you don't have to use all the space or all the 15, like you also don't have to use all the characters if you feel like you have adequately explained or talked about something. Just like leave it concise, short, and it'll still get across. And so this is what I talked about earlier in terms of how you can think about shaping or like grounding your activities or personal statement in. These are like the characteristics of a medical student. And so just trying to keep like maybe just have this handy as you're like writing your personal statement or your activities, just to see how you can talk about your experiences that might show like, oh, like teamwork, or they might show that had like a high degree of scientific inquiry. You're really into research. So just keep these kind of in the forefront of your mind when you're talking about your the applicant like the personal statement and activities. Um, the Texas medical schools always have like very different, not very different, but there's always like something different because they use a different like application system. And so generally the same or very close to the same timeline. May 1st, submissions open earlier for this. You are going to have a very similar personal statement. It is shorter than the AMCAS personal statement, and so just keeping that in mind if you're going to write or if you're going to apply to a Texas medical school, and your AMCAS personal statement is 5,200 characters, like you're going to have to go back and edit some of that. So just keep that in mind. And then there are two additional essays, the second essay being optional. The activities is 300 characters for like a regular activity, 500 for your most meaningful. The MCAT is like there's more kind of like grace on how old it can be. And then something slightly different is that the Texas medical schools run off kind of like a match system similar to like when you would apply for residency. And so, you apply, you rank, but ultimately it's not like you get to pick, you have like the final say. It's based off like a rank match system. And then there is a flat fee of 215. It doesn't like change with how many schools you apply to. But because of that, there is not a fee waiver available. Also equally as important is the DO schools, and so they also have a different application system. The timeline is somewhat similar. May 6th for last year's when they opened. Um, so just kind of knowing that all of these things will be happening around the same time. Another reason to start early and get this all squared away. Personal statement is the same character limit. Letters of rec will be submitted to every school. And for DO schools, it's really highly recommended that one of your letter writers is a DO physician. And so something to keep in mind if you are planning to apply to a DO school, that could be like shadowing them, working with them as like a scribe, whatever like capacity it may be, just having, putting that on your radar early that you need a DO letter of rec. And then there's the influence section, which is like your opportunity to talk about how like someone has influenced you for like pursuing medicine. Cost for this one, the primary is 198 for the first program, 50 for each additional, and there is a fee waiver available, so can be an expensive process. And then the secondaries also vary on the cost. In terms of the question of like, do I need a cohesive application? It doesn't need to be cohesive in the sense that like it needs to like every activity or thing you talk about needs to like kind of like complement or mirror the previous activity. But I think you should try to create an application that tells the story of you. And so if that comes in the form of like research plus volunteering plus this job, like, and you can kind of string them along together to show like how overall, while these 4 or 5 activities may have been like vastly different, they still kind of show you these aspects of who I am. Um, and so, yeah, I think being cohesive in terms of like the perfect activities or like the right things to do is not the goal, but kind of you should just think of your application as, yeah, you are telling a story about yourself, and how can you string these activities and experiences along that can kind of take the reader and show them, what's important to you, why are you passionate about medicine, what experiences have you had, like how have you grown from them. And so I think that's something to be more cognizant about when you are writing up your application. um, yeah, so kind of the last 2 points. I think it's more important to show that you're well-rounded, and to show that regardless of what your like the actual experiences are, that you come at them with dedication, you are passionate about them, and that you're able to kind of show something that you got from them or how that contributed to who you are today. And so we kind of touched on this earlier about like the timeline of it all. So you're gonna want to submit your application as soon as possible. And so like this upcoming cycle would be May 30th. So the applications, they get reviewed in the order that they are received. And so kind of how we talked about earlier, you'll send it in as early as May 30th. They won't send it out until like several weeks later. It's like the first batch of applications that they'll send out. And so if you can submit your application very close, like probably within like a few days to up to a week after May 30th, you will most likely be in that first batch of applications that get sent out to medical schools. Versus like if you were to submit your primary application in like the end of July, they have now from May 30th to July 27th receives applications all the way up to that point, and they have to process them and validate, like go through them. Um, and that can push the timeline of when the medical school will receive it um, to the uh, like 6 or the 8 week aspect of this timeline. And so, yeah, it's just like we commented on earlier, you want a quality application, but don't let it like perfection kind of be the thing that holds you back to submitting your application. Because this can really kind of make or break, when you get your secondaries and when they'll extend an interview offer to you, because it's all kind of connected in the way that your primary application, they won't send you a secondary application until they receive and view your primary application. And so if it takes 8 weeks for them to get it from when you submitted it to AMCAS, that's 8 weeks right there. And then they'll send you back the secondary. Usually you try to get those back to them within 2 weeks. So that's now you're 10 weeks out from when you submitted it. And then at that point, you have now, that's 10 weeks that they've been offering interviews. They've been looking at more applicants. And so it just, yeah, like we've kind of been beating this point in. It's just really beneficial for you to send that as early as you can. And in addition to your primary application, just making sure that anything required for the whole application is submitted. So whether that's your MCAT score or your letters of rec, a lot of medical schools will not even look at your application like for consideration of an interview until they've received all aspects of your application. And so obviously the primary app is really important, but don't let those other things kind of fall behind because your application won't be viewed until they have like the complete application. So yeah, that was a lot of information I recognize. This is our post survey.